Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
Derech Hashem.
Hi, how are you? Okay, I think we get started. Let's just sort this out. If everybody could mute themselves for the moment, it would probably be helpful. Let's. Okay. Right.
Hello, everybody.
Okay. Hi. Let's get started. Please, everybody, if you can mute yourselves, that would be helpful. Thank you. Okay. Right. So, given that this week is Chanuka, I thought it would be a good idea to connect the topic that we started last time, and as hopefully we will discover, it is absolutely directly relevant to Chanuka. I'm just going to, that's better. Right. The topic we were discussing was the twin-pronged approach of the Ramchal when talking about the methodologies that we use to arrive at a conclusion that of the existence of the Rabbeinu Shalom. So he said, "Tzorich sheyamin v'yeda." It is necessary to believe and know. In other words, he seems to be putting forward the need, the obligation that there be both belief and knowledge, ya'amin v'yeda, and he actually says it in that order. So this is really what we need to address. Now, what has this got to do with Chanuka? Well, quite a lot, as it happens. I'd like to start off by showing. I'm going to screen share in a minute, and I'm going to learn a little piece in a sefer called Tcheles Mordechai, which was written by one of the great poskim of the last century, the Maharsham, Reb Shalom Shvadron, was really one of the greatest poskim, and he wrote a sefer al Torah called Tcheles Mordechai, and in Parshas Lech Lecha, where he discusses the process by which Avraham Avinu arrives at the conclusion that there is a Rabbeinu Shalom, there is a very beautiful medrash, and the way that he explains this medrash, I think, helps us a lot. So let me just screen share whilst everybody, if you could mute your mics, thank you. Here we go. Whiteboard. Yes, I think that's what we want. No, it's not the whiteboard. Sorry, try that again. It is, of course, the other one. It is, there we go. But it's not this one. It is the other one. There we go. Here we go. Can everybody see that? I hope you can see that. So I'll take you through it. Don't worry if it looks a bit daunting. I'll take you through it. It's the left-hand column, and where it says the Lamed base, okay? It brackets Lamed base. That means this is his 32nd Dvar Torah on Parshas Lech Lecha. He had plenty to say, of course. So it goes as follows: B'medrash Rabba Lech Lecha, Hadohu Dichsiv Miyitein Li'ever Kayoina Ufa Ve'eshkoina. A very beautiful pasuk, where the pasuk says that the Navi asks. I'm just trying to just give me a second. Where was it? Yes. The Navi says as follows: "Who shall give me would that I have a limb like a dove, or ufa ve'eshkoina? I would fly and I would rest." And that is a pasuk that the Medrash references to the process where Avraham Avinu discovers the Rabbeinu Shalom. It is a desire to have limbs like a dove, to fly and to rest. What is going on? Says the Medrash. Yoinozu poireches bichnaf aleph. A dove flies with one wing, ubichnaf beis hi noicha, and with the other wing, it rests. Now, to what extent and whether this is meant to be taken literally or not is not really the point. Okay, so the Medrash says as follows. The Medrash says as follows. All other birds, what it's explaining is as follows. All other birds rest on a rock or a tree when they get tired. But when the dove gets tired, she pushes off the ground with one wing and flies with the other. What's the mashal? Venira. What does this mean? What is this metaphorically? What is this reference? Says the Maharsham. We're on the third line now. Second word. Venira. Dehne Avraham Avinu hoyam izboinen b'tchila b'darkei philosophia. Avraham Avinu used philosophical insights. He used his brain, as the Rambam says. V'hisig emunah ha'amitis. And he arrived at the correct conclusion, the true belief. V'ulam, however, Hashem Yisborach Rotza, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted sheyamin gam b'derech HaKabbalah, that he should also base his belief on tradition. V'hu, and the reason is, ki im yile sichloi milahasig b'seichel, what would be if, for some reason, and we will go further into this later tonight, I'll show you the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, that what would be if somebody finds difficulty for a variety of reasons to utilize the method purely of intellect and reason. And that gets tired. That's the moshel, the dove that gets tired by relying just on the one wing, as it were, which is the wing of philosophy. Then he has another wing, something else to rely on, which is tradition. Then he'll rely on Kabbalah, and that is what we see. There are other indicators other than pure intellect and rational exploration. There are other ways to see, pointers that Hashem exists. As it says in Parshas Vayeschanan. And this is what is meant by this mashal to the dove, that he flies. Flying means that you go off on your own, as it were, relying on your own seichel. And on the second one, it rests, meaning you rely on something else. You rely, as it were, to some extent, on tradition. And that is what is meant over here, which is a very beautiful explanation. And what it means is that we need, and this is the approach I'm going to take, and I'm going to try and demonstrate to you that actually the gap between those Rishonim who are generally quoted as being firmly in one camp or firmly in another, it is usually spoken about in the following terms. This debate is usually spoken about in the following terms. Either one relies totally on one's intellect, or one relies totally on tradition. And therefore we have this horrible term, blind faith, right? Which is an awful thing. It's an absolutely awful phrase. And it's seen as being very binary. And indeed, there is no question, certain Rishonim prefer one as being more elemental and more fundamental than the other. That is true. However, it is an error. It is not correct. And again, tonight we're not going to be able to show you all of this. I'll give you a sample. There is more of showing that this approach, which the Maharsham is saying pshat here in the Medrash, both are valid. Both are valid. Both have their limitations, potentially, and both have validity. And together, one builds up a whole picture. Now, what is the starting point? That's something we need to discuss, which is the start, which is the second phase, and how and why this works. Let's delve into this now a little bit. But before we do so, I want to, we'll do it with the where's it gone? Hold on. There, here we go. So, a word about Chanuka and the Yevonim. Let's understand the following. It is generally understood that what the Greeks classically began to do is that they were pretty much the first, certainly the first Western civilization that began to think outside the box. They began to think. They weren't just the hunter-gatherers trying to survive day to day, but they actually stopped to think. Hence, Socrates, the unexamined life is not worth living, etc. Right? So you then begin to have this whole civilization, which is still to this very day, without a shadow of a doubt, to this very day is still the fundamental institutions of Western democracies. The word itself, Democritus, trigonometry, architecture, music, literature, philosophy, so many music, systems of government, of thought, philosophy. All of these things we attribute to the Greeks as a civilization. And the Romans then, who were superb technocrats, they were engineers, they knew how to take these ideas and put them into practice, build the viaducts, the bridges. They were the Yedayim Yedei Esov. They could then take the concepts and bring them into existence in an amazing way. But they piggybacked primarily on that civilization. And that, by the way, is hinted to in one of the Haftorahs that we're going to say over Chanuka, and that is where the Novi says that that the Esov, when the bow in Esov, the arrow in Esov's bow is Yovon. Va'irarti b'nayich Yovon al b'nayich Tzion. That is the method. It could be that the delivery mechanism is that of Rome. They're very good at that. They are, like I said, they're engineers, they're technocrats. They can build, they can put things into practice. But the concepts, the world of concepts, the world of ideas is all based on Yovon. Now, on the one hand, that's an amazing thing. It's an amazing thing because they started being human in many respects by utilizing that which sets us apart, our ability to think and work things out. And that in itself is not a bad thing at all. It's quite an amazing thing. We're given a brain, we're meant to use it. Absolutely. The problem is they then took this to what they thought was its logical conclusion. Now, there's a few ways of looking at this. Anybody who's read Asterix will understand what I'm saying. And if we get time, we'll have a look at an essay of the Meshech Chochmah. And rather than recognizing the human mind as something transcendental, something divine, and endeavoring to use it in humility, it went the exact opposite way around. We mustn't think of them as just sort of nice, benign people. You know, Pythagoras, drowned his students who didn't go along with him. There's a lot of stuff which we don't always read about, which isn't so great. But what is this ultimately, fundamentally? What is it actually about? It is actually about man. Man is indeed, when I say man, I don't mean man as opposed to woman. You know that. But man is an incredible being. But to elevate man, quite literally put him on a pedestal, whether it's running naked in the Olympics, whether it's their physical achievements, whether it's man in when man becomes the center, it becomes androcentric. When it becomes man is the pinnacle of everything. And if we have any gods, we're going to have loads of them because it's fun. We'll all put them all into our pantheon, but they will be exactly like us. We'll drag them down to us. They'll fight with each other. They'll squabble over different things. They'll have wars. You realize what we've done? The whole concept is degraded down to bring everything down to our level. That's in very, very simple terms. I'm oversimplifying. The Torah recognizes the chokhmah of Yovon as being beautiful, That is Yaft Elokim liyefes v'yishkoin ba'oholei shem. Noach says that Yefes, his son, who is the grandfather, as it were, of Yovon of Greece, Yaft Elokim liyefes. There is beauty there. Indeed, the word Yovon is noi, but it's backwards. Noi is the Hebrew word for beauty, but of course it's backwards. It is beautiful, and it has a legitimate place, ba'oholei shem, such that there are opinions in halacha that you can write a Sefer Torah in Greek. It has its place. It has a legitimate place in the tents of Shem, in our tents. But at the same time, Chazal describe it as being darkness. Occasionally, when I've given this shiur in slightly different form and I wanted to be clever, I would call the shiur Black Beauty, because it's choshech and it's beautiful at the same time. How can something be black and beautiful at the same time? And I don't mean that in any political sense, of course. I mean it as in a lack of darkness. Saying that something is choshech means that it is obscuring. Surely Yovon would be the age of enlightenment, of reason. What went wrong from our perspective? Why was it so terrible? So let's begin to look at some of the quotes from some of the Rishonim. I'm going to give you tonight. We're going to look at a sample of some of the. We're going to go all the way down to the Steipler quoting Kant. Okay, so we're going to go from the Ramban all the way down to the Steipler quoting Kant. Let's see. So we're going to start off with the Ramban, Nachmanides. Now I've highlighted it. This is just, I've taken a photo of my Kisvei Ramban. This is a drosha the Ramban gave, Nachmanides gave, called Derech Hashem Shiur, which is a wide-ranging drosha, very beautiful drosha. And in the middle there, he writes as follows, and I'm going to take it from the top in the bit that I've highlighted in yellow. Umikan tire, from here you will see Achzorios roish hafilosofim v'kashio yimach shemai, yimoche shemai. From here you will see, now give you the context, on the page before, he's talking about the fact that it was pretty evident to anybody, he'll talk about it more a little bit further down, that Hashem existed. I mean, let's just remind ourselves, by the way, even in 2021, were it 2021, I think? Yeah, even where we are, 2020, yes, we what percentage of the world believes in a single God? Anybody? About 52, 53%. If you add up Christians, Muslims, don't bother adding up the Jews, they don't really count statistically. The Baha'is, maybe, whatever. You get over half of the world's population still today. That's even still today. Go back, extrapolate backwards, and there's no question, there was never a doubt about the existence of the divine, pretty much until the so-called Enlightenment, right? So what happened? Now, the Greeks came along, says the Ramban, Umikan tire achzorius roisha philosophim. From here, this is fascinating. He depicts it as cruelty. What they've done is cruelty. And he says very harsh words, and he is referring to Aristotle. He says, may his name be blotted out. Shehu makhish kamodvorim, because he denies many things which many witnessed themselves personally. Kamodvorim shera'u rabim v'ra'inu anachnu amitosam v'nisparsamu ba'olam. Let's not forget that according to the religious canon of over 50% of the world still today, Hashem revealed himself to millions of people on Har Sinai. They take that as part of their creed. This is not us, this is them. Okay, they can then argue about whether he did or didn't change his mind and have a word in the ear of somebody else and change it. That's neither here nor there. But ironically, the only thing that they absolutely do agree on, and that was taken as historical fact. It just was finished. And he comes along and he's taken many things which were accepted as being historically accurate, not just articles of faith. And what did he do? What was the method that he used? He used the very thing This is to this day you see the so-called new atheists, as they're called today. It was Denton or Harris or any of these chevra, Dawkins. The very thing that is given to us to be able to discover Hashem is the very thing they use to shut him out. And this has a long, though not very noble tradition. Says the Ramban, things that were known about, it was well known. And because there was a connection to things that were spiritual, and they were not just known intellectually, they were experienced. They had access to spiritual channels which were real. Because of the closeness to the creation of the world and to the Mabul, nobody suggested that God didn't create the world. Where they did go wrong, of course, is what they wanted to do was to harness that for their self-interest, to isolate single strands of spiritual avenues and pathways. That was Avodah Zorah. That's why it was called Zorah. It wasn't Sheker. It was Zorah. It was strange. It was about self-gratification. I am after good crops, fertility, whatever it is. So I will be able to identify and isolate a specific channel, spiritual pathway, and use it, but I'll use it for my own end. So it was a selfishness. But there was no question, says the Ramban, that nobody would have turned around and said that it didn't exist. Whatever. Now, all of this was so until the Yevonim came along. Fascinating. We won't have time to go into it. He says this was a nation that had not inherited wisdom. Fascinating. There's an irony here. The Kuzari talks about the fact that the Greeks, or the Syrian Greeks, or maybe we should call them more correctly, but it doesn't matter. We know what we're talking about. They were Am Chodosh, Shaloi Nochalu Chochma. They were a new nation that had not inherited wisdom. Kom Ha'ish HaYodua, this well-known man, referring to Aristotle, got up. V'loi ha'emin. Now here he gets to the heart of the matter. V'loi ha'emin rak b'murgash. He only believed. This is empiricism. This is that which I can subject to intellectual, rational observation. I can quantify it. And therefore I can have the arrogance, for example, to say the smallest unit of anything in the universe is atom. Because what does atom mean? It's the Greek for indivisible. There's a laugh. It's indivisible. Why? Because I can't see it. Therefore, it cannot exist. That is an arrogance of the worst sort. Essentially, that's what it was. That is the root of it. He said anything that can be, okay, you had metaphysics. Fine. We know that. But the existence, you have to be able to subject it to empirical observation, to quantify it. And therefore man takes center stage. Hashem is pushed out. And then this whole sphere of something that is not, by its definition, subject to empirical observation and evaluation, it does not exist. You want to believe it? Believe it, fine. Believe in the tooth fairy, but who cares? It has no connection to anything, any reality. The only thing that exists are the things are natural, the natural sciences. The natural sciences, the things that we can observe and we can quantify and we can do experiments and we can empiricism, essentially. And he goes on to say, we don't need to do the rest of this is really the core of the problem. So here we have it, according to the Ramban, this is where the Yevonim begin to go wrong. Now, let's have a look at the Rambam. Now, you would think the Rambam, Maimonides, the Rambam is generally quoted and possibly misunderstood as, although the Rambam writes himself, he did follow Aristotle in things which were mitachas hagalgal, things things that are below, things that are in the observable physical universe. He acknowledged, and he called him a tremendous chacham, and I don't think anybody would argue with that. But he said anything that is outside of that or above that, no. Now, the Rambam, therefore, often, and it's not the time or the place, and it needs a massive, meta-analysis. But I want to show you a few bits and pieces, possibly from the Moreh Nevuchim, where you begin to see a different picture. This is, I can give you the Moreh Nevuchim is in Chelik Aleph Perek Lamed Daled here, part 1, chapter 34. There are others as well. Again, this is just a small sample, because really it should be a course. Now, the Rambam here is talking about how we receive our knowledge and belief in Hashem. There are these different avenues. Okay, so he now is going to say, I'll give you the summary before we do it, and then I'll show it to you inside. He now says that the limitations of human intellect, for a variety of reasons, and one of them is people's bad midas. The human being is theoretically capable of discerning and working out, even assuming that it is totally philosophical, which it isn't, by the way, even in the Rambam himself, as I'll show you. Let's even assume for a second that the Rambam thinks that the pathway, as he writes also in Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah, what is the way? You look at the world and you see what a wonderful place, and you think about whether it's teleology, lots of different, even if you say it's purely intellectual and philosophical, the Rambam clearly acknowledges that the number of people that will be successful in this intellectual endeavor is tiny. And most people, he'll say, will die and not having reached that for a variety of reasons. You need to purify yourself, meaning you need to, can you mute yourselves, whoever's making the noise, please. You need to negate any biases and other reasons as well. But now look what he says. Now let's go to that's the quick introduction to this source. He says as follows, the highlighted bits. Had we not been given our what we would call Masorah tradition, and had we not had received guidance, in other words, if we were starting tabula rasa, right? If we were starting blank slate, with nothing, no prior knowledge at all, we would have had to utilize our own intellectual capacities with their grenzen, with their limitations, and being able to verify and authenticate everything that needs authenticating. That is only possible after long and hard work. Sorry, I said most, he says most. He says all. This would cause everybody to die, but before they even got to work out whether there is or isn't a God. If people, in other words, this is the so-called arch rationalist. This is the Rambam. Look what he's saying. If we didn't have Masorah, and we were just left to our own devices, we basically would, it doesn't mean we're not capable theoretically of doing it, but lemaisa, as they like to say here in Berlin for some reason, lemaisa, in practically speaking, everybody would die before they got there. Who would survive this intellectual battle and arrive at the right conclusion? One person in a city, maybe two in a family, but the yechidim, individuals. In other words, this is the Rambam telling us, yes, it's theoretically possible, but if we did not have Masorah, if we didn't have a tradition, then we absolutely wouldn't get there. Okay, that's really worth pointing out. Next, this Rambam is a bit more complicated. I'm not sure whether, again, I'll send through to you these sources. This is in the Chelik Rishon Perek Nun, and here he actually defines the knowledge that we are talking about and we're trying to achieve. It's a mistake to think and here that it is, like I said before, all it is purely intellectual. It isn't. You see clearly from this Rambam that this is, look at the bottom line here, for example. I mean, here, by the way, he talks about the Trinity here, which is really interesting. He basically says there are people who think that they are able to make intellectual leaps of knowledge, but really they don't know what on earth they're talking about. If you can think that something is one, but really it's three, and it's obvious what he's talking about, he says that means you haven't got an understanding of what's going on. Bottom line, the concept of das is it is not purely intellectual. It is a koyach that we have inside of us. The lashon he uses elsewhere. Let me just look here in. Whoops, sorry. Look in my notes. The lashon he is that which you can be yitzair hadovar benefesh ha'odam. There is something internally which we can experience, and which you can then connect to intellectually as well. But it's a mistake to think that what he's saying is that it is purely intellectual. And the proof is, he says it's also shehu gam michutz lemachshava. And then he talks about separating yourself from all sorts of distractions and physical desires. And in other words, in the Rambam, it's very clear there are other sources. This is way beyond purely something that's purely intellectual. Okay, now let's move on. And now the truth is, it really deserves a share on its own. This is a beautiful classic essay from the Meshech Chochmah. Now we're back into modern times, right? Meshech Chochmah died in 1926, I think it was. Rameir Simcha HaKohen Midvinsk, the modern classic. And here he writes, I'm going to try and highlight a few pieces here. It really needs its own treatment. See if I can annotate. Is that what I want? Is that the bit I want to be able to show you? I think it's annotate. Yeah, here we go. Okay, can use the mouse. Hopefully this will work. Okay, so we're going to start from here. Yes, if you can follow with me on the mouse. Now he's talking about. He starts off talking about emotions, but it's more than emotions. He's talking about the subjectivity of, let's say he's talking about emotions. Vahaboror, it is clear. I'll take you through a few selected bits. Follow the mouse. It is clear. All things, emotions mainly, are built off of nature. And the sensations and the feelings which a person feels, such as love or beauty or heroism, these are all human subjective concepts built on the human experience. Okay? V'ho'amim hakadmoinim, and previous civilizations, hikdishu kol koiches hateva, they sanctified all of these things. So heroism, self-sacrifice, love, beauty, all these concepts are defined in terms of our own experience. It's quite Kantian, actually. They are subjective, but they are fundamentally, therefore, they are human. And therefore, because they're human, previous civilizations put them up there on a pedestal. And what they did was they got very worked up about these things. They cherished them. And therefore they gave them names. The god of beauty, the god of beauty, the god of strength, the god of love, etc. And if somebody exhibited an extreme in one of these faculties, ben Eloki, then they said, oh, you are godlike, which is really referencing themselves. The ad hayoim, he says, until this day, ha'amim mitzayrim tmunois, art is drawn, and umakdishim muchoshim, and that which can be sensed and experienced and felt is put up there on a pedestal and is deemed to be kodesh. Va'af ha'yishmaelim, and even our cousins, the Yishmaelim, mekadshim kever meshichom b'Mecca, they sanctify the Kaaba in Mecca, ukeyotze bazeh, and similar concepts. Of course, contrast this, of course, to Moshe Rabbeinu being buried where exactly? Okay, you get me? Okay. Nimtza, it follows, therefore, dahahergeshois, their emotions support their belief, habonui al hamuchash v'hamatzuyar, which is fundamentally based on that which can be sensed and drawn and painted and described in architecture or literature or poetry or music, all of which may very well be beautiful, but they are fundamentally human. Loi kain Hashem. Not so God. She'omad Avraham v'hisboinein. Avraham Avinu thought deeply. She'enoi chelek mehanivroim, that God cannot be part of creation, nor can he be a physical force or element. He cannot be described. He can't be painted. And he can't be understood and captured by my intellect. Because if he could be, then then he would be definable and thus limited. And he'd be limited. I mean, he's lyrical. His Hebrew is beautiful. It's lyrical as well. I hope you appreciate it. Anything that has an end also has a beginning. And then his own existence is imperative. Whereas Vahu, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu, mechuyav hamatzius, he is the only non-contingent existence. In other words, he is the only thing that just has to be. This is something we're going to come across in the Ramchal a little bit later. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the only thing that just absolutely has to be. Why? Just because. You can't say why. If you can answer that, then he's not the first cause. He's a priori. He just is. Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, existence. He is existence. He brings everything into existence without any support or using anything else, from absolutely nothing. A unity that is unlike any other unity. If he was more than one, then there would be, if there was more than one unique thing, then there would be more. There would be differences. Okay, we can't go through all of this. V'ze'ion amiti, go back to the highlighted bit. V'ze'ion amiti umuskol. This is an insight which is true and can be absorbed. Aval mi yuchal hasikoi. So then, who can really understand this? Add ki kosav Rabbeinu Bachia Hazokin. The Chovos Halvavos writes, fascinating, Shelo yavduhu be'emes, the only two people that can really serve Hashem properly. Rak ha-philosoph or ha-novi, a philosopher or a novi, or a prophet. Because one, a true philosopher has worked him out. The one person out of a mishpacha that the Rambam describes, the one person in the city that theoretically, potentially, like Avraham Avinu, could theoretically, but you'd have to be a real philosopher, a true philosopher, by the way, and you'd have to survive also the attack from Kant and Locke and Hume, and we'll see if we get to that. Or Novi. A Novi is somebody who has personally experienced Hashem. Now, what does that mean? That means that Hashem has decided to share its experiential. Notice these two categories. One is rational, intellectual. The other one is, I don't want to say emotional, but experiential, right? Knowledge and experience. Ubechol zeh, nevertheless, here's the strange thing. The Rabbeinu Bachai writes, so we've defined Hashem, so to speak. We've defined him in the fact that he's undefinable, right? He cannot be experienced, and certainly not on his terms. And the Rabbeinu Bachai says the only two people that can serve Hashem are either a philosopher or a novi. Yet, ubechol zeh, yet kol Yisrael maminim be'emes mitziusoi va'achdusoi inyan muskel kazeh. Yet we, as a nation, we do truly believe in Hashem. We mock, this is his words. I hadn't actually intended going through all of this. I'm going to have to finish this off next week with part 2. But we mock the dare I say it, the subjectivity and the fluffiness of emotions, vespalos, shemargishim mitzad hateva. And we understand that everything other than that, anything outside of Hashem's the fact that he is the imperative for his own existence, anything outside of that is ultimately meaningless. And this is what Chazal mean when they say, why did we merit to say Shema? Because we are the children of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Mevinim inyan philosophy kazeh. We get it. And he's make fun of these emotions. Now, let's go on. Now, but he is acknowledging there's a challenge here, and we need to acknowledge the challenge, like the Rambam said, that it will only be a very few people that will be able to. The Rabbeinu Bechai says either a Novi or a philosopher. We are neither. The Rambam says it's going to be very few people, and yet we do somehow manage to have, hopefully, what is proper emunah. How does that work? So here he offers a fantastic, novel concept. He says, Ma osa. So what did HaKadosh Baruch Hu do? And here he gives Torah a whole new context. Ma osa l'darkei ha'hato'o b'koiches hamadame. What did Hashem do to negate the problems, the toxic evils of imagination and fantasy and subjectivity, besides for, by the way, the Rambam, I didn't really show it to you in any great detail, but it's very clear from the Rambam also in the beginning of Mishnah Torah, where he puts so much emphasis on self-control, on being a mensch, being dignified and in control of your emotions and various impulses and urges. Because these are the twin things that will rob us from the ability to arrive, even intellectually, at a proper conclusion. That is why we have Torah. Ma'osa, so what did Hashem do? Hirbe lahem, he did two things. Hirbe lahem Torah muskolos rabois, b'Torah shebichsav sheba'al peh. So he gave us this most incredibly complex and multi-layered, brilliant kaleidoscope of a body of knowledge called Torah. What is the purpose of it? L'chazek koyach haseichel, to strengthen our seichel, the ability for real critical thinking, analysis, working things out. And in Klal Yisrael, the scholar has always been the prince amongst men, not the. And here's the irony. There's a Chanuka connection. Sport. What's the old joke? What's the thinnest book in history? The Jewish book of sporting heroes. We do brain, we don't do brawn. And the irony, of course, is that the Yevonim fought by the Maccabees, and the only Jewish sports organization is called Maccabi, which is quite funny. Nothing against football, and playing sport is all healthy, but the concept is actually quite laughable. It's quite funny. That's the very thing. I'm not anti-sport, but putting that up there on a pedestal is exactly what they did. And the one Yom Tov that we fought against that with these 13 Chashmonoim, there were 13, Rashi says. A favorite trick I always like to do is by, asking kids, how strong do you think the Maccabees were? And they say, they must have been very strong. No, sorry, over to the other side for a bonus. Giborim biyad chaloshim. We say in davening they were weak. They were weak. They were not giborim. They were chaloshim. They were kollel guys. They were the koyanim. You serve in the Beis Hamikdash 2 weeks a year, and the rest of the time, what do you think they did? Kisif se kohen yishmeru das. They were the rebbes. They were the teachers. Anyway, sorry, I digress. So the point of Torah is to chazek koyach haseichel, to be mechazek our seichel, and Jews are clever. Why? It's probably a form of epigenetics as well. That has actually been suggested. Lord Snow, C.P. Snow, spoke about this. We have produced so many, even in the secular world, geniuses, because all of our Zaydas, they sat and learned. As Disraeli said to, who was it? Who was his famous arch in the House of Commons? I can't remember who it was. I'm too tired. I didn't prepare this. But Disraeli, when he was teased by whoever it was, I forget, he turned around and he says that when your ancestors, sir, were troglodytes and they were hunter-gatherers, my ancestors were high priests in Solomon's golden temple, sitting and learning, and it's in Hansard, something like that. This is who we are. So that's one side of it. That's the purpose of Torah. This is to overcome the subjectivity and the frailty of pure just imagination and emotions. Hello. Thank you. Okay, here he says something else. We'll leave this. He gives space for these emotions by having been Adam Lachaveiro. This is another whole schmooze, not for now. Let's just, we're not going to finish this tonight, but let's, I'll come back to this. Won't do this tonight. Let me just, maybe with this we will finish for this evening at least. There's plenty more to be said. But let me go to a very, one of the modern, a quote from one of the Gedolim, Reb Shimshon Pinkus, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. In his Sefer on Emunah, here's one quote. It's highlighted here. Let's just read it and translate it. And again, we need to, next week in Mitzvah Hashem, it'll be Chanuka still, we will fill this out and round it out and give it more expression. V'hinei, he writes, Yesh ha-soivrim, ha-svurim ki inyan ho-emunah ha-pshuta hu-lahamin mishum shekach omru lahem b'li lachkor. There are people who think that the concept of emunah pshuta is just to believe because somebody told you that, without thinking about it. Ledati zutaos, he says, in my opinion, this is a mistake. Mishama'amin ki omrulai, if somebody who believes something just because they are told them, bibchinas pesiyam in l'chaldava, they are like what Shlomo HaMelech says, a fool believes anything. Who tippush, you're an idiot. Emunah pshuta, and this, by the way, Reb Volba used to write, maybe I'll put the quote up next week on the screen. Reb Volba wrote in the name of the Chazon Ish, Emunah pshuta, when we talk about simple emunah, we don't mean unquestioning emunah or just to swallow it just because somebody's told it to me. Emunah pshuta, says the Chazon Ish, is emunah brura, clear emunah. It doesn't need to be overly sophisticated. And I am aware that we have not done the job yet tonight. We're building up the picture. There has to be the part 2. Don't just watch this shiur. It'll have to be next week as well. Okay? But we're building up a bit of hopefully a bit of a picture. Emunah pshuta hu lahamin ba'ofen poshut b'masharoyim. Emunah pshuta means to endow that which you see with a certain amount of trust and credibility. Koloimar kach, for example, Odom roya tikra. Somebody sees, you see something, you see a roof. Hu yochel histapik. It is possible to have doubts. Maybe I'm really dreaming. And of course, there are philosophically these experiments. Epistemology, the brain in a vat, famous, who knows that I really exist? Maybe everything's just a dream and we're in some sort of matrix. Okay? I'm aware of all of these discussions. What he's saying is, however, and I would, I think it was, I can't remember whether it was Bishop Berkeley, who took, was it Locke's foot and stubbed it against the tree, and he yelped in pain, and he said to him, I refute it thus. In other words, when you get into a car, when you live your life, the vast majority of us live our lives accepting that what we see is real. We mustn't have a double standard when it comes to something else. All of a sudden it becomes convenient it's a hypocrisy. Emunah Pshuta means to apply the same level of proof that I require. And this is something that anybody who's involved in Kirov honestly just asks people to be honest. Apply the same level of proof. Let's establish a level, a threshold. What is the definition of God? What is the definition of the word proof? Proof is a continuum. In maths, proof means one thing. In psychology, the word proof means something else. There's a continuum of proof. So what do I mean when I use that word? How do I live my life? And we're talking about something which, again, by definition, is unknowable, ultimately. And the Rambam, by the way, in Moreh Nevuchim himself says this in the final analysis. So what am I trying to achieve? Emunah Pshuta, says Shimshon Pinkas, it does not mean just to unquestioningly swallow something just because I was told it. Nor, by the way, does it mean that I start with a blank slate, of course, chas v'shalom, and try and work everything out myself. Says the Rambam, you're never going to manage. Of course you start with your, like I said, and I'll finish with this. Of course you start, like the Ramchal says in Derech Hashem, tzarich sheya'amin v'yeda. Of course I trust. We do have a Messiah. We have a tradition. And we have a very unique tradition. We have a tradition which is highly plausible. Even if you look at it logically, it is incredibly plausible. And there's lots of work that can be done around that. And you say to yourself, millions of very smart people have accepted it. That doesn't mean that I don't question after that. Of course I can. Ya'amin v'yeda. I have tools at my disposal to arrive at a conclusion that is deeper. Adam Raya Tikra, he says, maybe I'm asleep, maybe ulai, zehu shtus. That's crazy. So it's neither. It's a balance between the two. And in Yirtzeh Hashem, next week, I hope we will, well, you never finish it because it's a big topic. I did promise you the Steipler talking about Kant. I'll just show you where it is. And he talks, here we go, I'll just show it to you. We'll do it properly next week. Kom chochem echad mechachmeim be'ir Königsberg, which is from the city of Königsberg, and that is a reference to Kant, and who then destroyed Aristotle's edifice. And we'll talk about what that means next week in Yirtzeh Hashem. But to summarize, let's try and summarize very quickly. What have we hopefully learnt this evening? We hopefully have shown that often the gap, it is often portrayed as in there are two camps of Rishonim. Either Emunah is done through total intellectual speculation, or it's Messiah. And the truth is that the gap is much narrower than you think. There are very, very few that fall very clearly only into one camp. And even the Rambam himself tells us, of course, we rely on our Messiah. Even as we endeavor to understand deeper and deeper and arrive at something which is not just a philosophical knowledge, it's deeper than that. It is something which is in our nefesh to believe. The Chazon Ish used to call it, it's a spiritual muscle, which requires exercise. It needs to be utilized. So it is kind of somewhere between the two. So the starting point, and that I believe is what the Derech Hashem, the Ramchal, was saying. Tzarich sheya'amin v'yeda, both. Now, the parameters of these we still need to work out a little bit, but hopefully next week on Chanuka we'll do a little bit more work on this. Thank you so much for joining me, and Alechtig Chanuka. We will see you next week in Yirtzeh Hashem. Take care. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Kol tov. Good night. Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.